Interesting TCM and acupuncture. The anatomy and physiology of the spleen of the 5 organs of Chinese medicine: form, orifice, psychology, fluid, and time. Interesting TCM and acupuncture, Part 7. Contents: Introductory statement. Main functions. Physiological characteristics. The relationship of body, orifice, physiological characteristics, fluid, and time. Introductory statement. The spleen is located in the middle jiao, under the diaphragm, and to the left of the stomach. The Simple Questions chapter, Tai Yin Yang Ming discussion says, the spleen is connected to the stomach. The spleen has the function of transportation and transformation, and it helps to create blood. The spleen and stomach are both in the middle burner and are the points at which the digestion of food and drink take place once they have entered the body. They absorb the subtle essence of food and transport it to the lungs. After people are born, their life activities continue in accordance with the harmonization of the essence, qi, blood, and jin-ye fluids as they transform, are generated, and fill the body. This relies on the spleen and stomach to transform and transport essence from food and liquid. The spleen and stomach are referred to as post-birth because their function of digestion and transportation largely appears after birth. The key movement of the energy of the spleen is upward in nature. It is a greater yin organ and is considered damp and earth-like in nature. It also commands the movement and transportation of fluids. Thus, it is positively affected by dry conditions and negatively affected by wet conditions. It transforms in the flesh and muscles and manifests in the mouth and lips. Its psychological attribute is thought, and its fluid is saliva. The greater yin spleen meridian is connected to the bright yang stomach meridian, and the spleen serves as the inner aspect, while the stomach is the outer aspect. In the 5 elements, it's represented by earth. It's considered to be yin within yin and connects with the qi of late summer. It also appears during the transitional seasons of the year. Main functions. 1. Governs transportation and transformation. 2. Transportation and transformation of fluids. Governing transportation and transformation. The spleen governing transportation and transformation means that it takes the nutritional essence from food and drink and transports the water and grain essence in the form of subtle essence together with the fluids together. This water and grain essence and jin-ye fluid essence are absorbed and transported to every organ of the body in order to facilitate their function. This means that the spleen is the center of all activities related to metabolism in the body, and it is the post-heaven aspect which ties together all life functions of the human body. In order to better understand the function of transportation and transformation, we will explain this in 2 of its most important aspects: transport and transforming food products. Transporting and transforming food products refers to how the spleen qi enters the food products and breaks them down so that they can be absorbed as food essence. These food products are then further decomposed by the stomach. After this digestion, they turn into waste. They are then transported by the small intestine for further digestion. The food products are principally digested by the stomach and small intestine, but they must first coalesce with the spleen qi in order to begin the process of being broken down from their original food product form. The stomach enters the small intestine and directs food waste there, after the spleen qi has broken it down. This means that clear and turbid have already been broken into 2 parts, and the subtle essence of the food can be accepted by the small intestine, and the spleen qi may travel to the 4 other zang organs, being separated into functions related to essence, qi, blood, and jing fluid, and internally nourish the 5 organs and 6 viscera, while externally nourishing the skeleton, pores, tendons, and bones. The Simple Questions chapter of the True Containment of the Jade Mechanism says, the spleen is a lonesome organ. It occupies the space of Middle Earth and floods the 4 neighbors. The Simple Questions terminal discussion says, the spleen commands the movement of Jin-Ye fluids in the stomach. As a result, the spleen qi impacts the transportation and transformation functions of the entire body and can transform and create essence, qi, blood, and other substrates. If these are sufficient, they will nourish the organs and viscera, channels and collaterals, forelimbs, skeleton, connective tissues, pores, and so on. This supports the normal functioning of all parts of the body. If the spleen loses its function, it will result in loss of transportation, function, and swelling in the abdomen, issues with defecation and lack of appetite, as well as potential deficit of blood, fluids, essence, and qi. Transportation and transformation of fluids. Transportation and transformation of fluids refers to the ability to absorb water essence. The water essence is adjusted in the metabolism and benefits its function. The spleen qi moves and transports water and fluids and has 2 key elements. It helps the stomach and small intestines absorb liquid, meaning the water essence can enter the large intestine and absorb fluid. If the kidney qi can steam it and reabsorb water fluids, the spleen qi is transported upward to the lung, and in the lung it purifies and descends, filling the entire body. According to Simple Questions, the water essence has 4 coverings and benefits the 5 channels. B. The fluids are metabolized and transported. The lungs are the upper origin of water, and the kidneys are the lower origin of water. The spleen controls the middle jiao, and fluids rise up from it. Usually these fluids rise and move downward, following the movement of the spleen qi. If the spleen qi is scattered, then the water fluid and grain fluid will move up to the lungs. This clear part of the qi will enter the lungs and be used for purposes of purification. Then it will be transported to the pores, muscles, interstitial tissue, and facial apertures to moisten and smooth them. The heavy turbid portion will descend from the lung downward, moistening and smoothing the organs and viscera. After the qi is passed to the pores, skin, muscles, and interstices, it can also transform into sweat and push out toxins. After the water essence has been passed to the organs, pores, muscles, skin, and so on, it will be transported to the kidneys and bladder to join the turbid material and be steamed in order to remove the remainder of clear qi, which will move up and return to the lung. Transportation and transformation of fluids. Finally, the leftover turbid material will be excreted in the urine. The principal function of the spleen qi is in its ability to travel up and reach down and circulate the entire body without limitations. This allows the fluid metabolism of the body to be regulated and remain healthy. If the spleen function loses regularity, it tends to result in an excess of moisture and the eventual development of phlegmatic conditions. This results in edema and other similar problems. The Simple Question says, all excess water and swelling is related to the spleen. Whenever we see this type of illness in clinics, the key priorities are to strengthen the spleen, dry the excess fluids, and restore the correct function of the fluid. Transportation and transformation of food and the movement of moisture are the 2 functions of the spleen. These 2 functions move forth together. Food and drink are the means by which people receive nourishment after birth. They give birth to essence, qi, blood, jin, and ye fluids, and serve as the primary basic energetic unit of all living things. This digested food and drink changes into subtle essence and is absorbed, and all of its movement comes from the spleen. The spleen qi can not only transform food into subtle essence, it can also change into essence, qi, blood, jin, and ye fluids, and help the absorbing and movement of the essence, grains, and water, and subtle essence in the entire body, serving as the nutrition for the organs and viscera, the 4 limbs, skeleton, and all of the normal functioning of the body. It can also nourish the preheaven essence and assist with people's growth and development. This holds together the entire life function of the body at its root, and is therefore called the root of the post-heaven. The spleen is the root of the post-heaven, and on a theoretical level, it has the ability to nourish life and subdue illness. In daily life, you should focus on protecting the spleen and stomach and make the spleen qi full, supporting its transformation and transportation functions. This allows the upright qi to be sufficient and makes it difficult for external patterns to attack. This is why it said, if the spleen qi is strong in all 4 seasons, evil will not attack. Having said that, if the spleen qi is not strong, the qi in blood will become deficient and vacuous. People's bodies can easily become ill under such circumstances. In the text discussion of the spleen and stomach, it says, the 100 illnesses all come from the decline of the stomach and spleen. It controls the making of blood. The spleen controls the production of blood, and spleen qi is what allows for this. The body fluid is controlled in the vessels, and when it enters the center of the body, it does not typically leak from the vessels. It is normally believed in Chinese medicine that the heart governs the blood, the liver contains the blood, and the spleen generates the blood. In the Qing dynasty, Chen Mingzong said, the blood of the 5 organs and 6 viscera is generated by the spleen. The spleen qi has the ability to generate the blood, and in practical terms is what allows for the strength of the qi to manifest. The spleen qi is the origin of the function of the spleen in the body. If the body has sufficient qi, the spleen qi will be flourishing. If the spleen qi is strong, the qi of the body will be sufficient. If the qi is sufficient, then it can generate blood, and the spleen, blood, and qi may absorb together as one. If the spleen qi is expansive, it will have normal transportation qualities. The qi will be generated of this origin and will be sufficient to ensure the health of the body. The blood will move and will not leak outside the vessels. If the spleen qi is deficient or weak, it will not have enough strength to perform its transport function properly. The qi will not be properly generated and without origin. The qi will decline and its strength will become less. The blood will lose its ability to be contained and will end up being easily disturbed. In terms of pathology, the spleen not gathering blood and the spleen not absorbing blood will affect the entire body system. The spleen qi has the special quality of rising and has a profound relationship with the flesh and muscles. If the blood is not properly transported from the muscle and skin level, it will result in bloody defecation, bloody urination, and other similar blood losses from the lower body. This is typically referred to as the spleen not gathering blood. These diseases all have a relationship with blood following the deficient activity of qi and result in bleeding disorders of the lower body. The spleen not gathering blood is the result of the final process of qi vacuity and is typically explained as the vacuity causing blood to emerge. Typically, the blood is light in color and scant. If it is contained in fecal matter, it will tend to be black in color and oily. This is an example of qi deficiency. Part 3. Physiological characteristics. 1. The spleen controls rising. 2. The spleen prefers dryness and disdains damp. Spleen controls rising. Spleen qi controlling rising refers to the movement characteristic of the spleen. It moves up as its central function and creates clarity, as well as traveling to other organs. It rises up in clarity refers to the subtle essence of water and grain essence, which serves to nourish the body. Spleen qi rises up in clarity means that when the spleen qi rises up, it tends to expand and relax the body. It causes the stomach and interstitial tract to collect the essence of water and grain fluids, transporting them to the heart, the lungs, and so on. When it passes the heart, the lungs will transform with the blood and nourish the body by moistening it. If the spleen is deficient and weak, it will cause dampness and turbidity in the body. If the upward movement loses its consistency, it will make it so that the nutrition of water and grain essence loses its function. The qi and blood will become hindered, and each organ and collateral will not receive the moisture of essence, qi, and blood. In such cases, it will not be possible for the body to operate normally. In this case, the metabolism will also lose its proper function. The spleen qi rises up clearly in its use, which means that when it transforms, it appears in the shape of the body. The spleen controls the rising of clear qi, the stomach descends the turbid qi. These two things work in harmony together, and although they are opposite functions, they rely on one another. Spleen and stomach chapter of the book Lin Zhen Zhinan Yi says, the spleen easily moves things upward and strengthens them. The stomach easily moves things downward and harmonizes them. The spleen and stomach rise and fall in congress. They serve the entire function of this aspect of digestion of food and drink. If the spleen qi is deficient and weak, it will not properly rise. The turbid qi may then not descend. In the case that at the top cannot obtain the nutritional benefit of essence qi, it will result in headache and unclear vision. The vitality will become tired, and the turbid qi in the middle of the body will cause abdominal distension and chest fullness, and the lower jing qi will leak. In the words of Simple Questions chapter, Yin and Yang echoing image great discussion, clear qi if on the bottom will cause leakage of food. Turbid qi if on the top will cause anger and swelling. 2. It supports the inner organs. The spleen supports the inner organs means that the spleen qi can rise up and maintain the stability of the organs and their locations in the body, stopping them from sagging down. The spleen qi can rise up and the stomach qi can move down. This rising and falling relationship is what allows the organs to be kept stable in their respective places. The rising of spleen qi also stops the organs from prolapsing. If the spleen qi is weak and vacuous, it does not have enough strength to perform this function, and typically prolapse will occur. This can result in the internal organs hanging down and the stomach, kidney, uterus, anus, and other organs going into a state of prolapse. In clinic, we must repair this by tonifying the center, using techniques such as buzhong yiqi decoction and strengthening the spleen, and repairing prolapse. Central qi is the two energies of the spleen and stomach combined as one. When the rising and falling relationship is placed into harmony, if the qi descends, it will make it impossible for the spleen qi to rise, and the central qi will descend, causing the spleen to prolapse. 2. The spleen prefers dryness and disdains damp. Preferring dryness and disdaining damp is a special characteristic of the spleen and serves as the opposite of the stomach, which prefers moisture and disdains dryness. The spleen preferring dryness and disdaining damp refers to its function of transportation and transformation and cannot be understood separately. Spleen qi, when strong and vibrant, transforms and transports fluids, moving the water essence to perform the four coverings. Normally, there is no phlegm inhibiting the movement of fluid. The spleen energy moves up as normal, and the fluid can rise to the lungs. Thus, it is said, the spleen qi spreads its essence and passes upward to the lungs. The spleen qi rises in movement, requires that the spleen itself is relatively dry and does not develop phlegm. If it is clear, it performs the function described in Wu Da's text, The Requirements of Medicine, who says, if the spleen rising can take place, if the spleen is vacuous and in decline, the movement of fluid will be hindered. Phlegm will result inside, and in the words of the classics, the spleen will generate moisture. At this time, the moisture will collect and hinder the spleen qi, making it unable to rise. The spleen yang will not be as vibrant and is described as moisture tiring the spleen. External moisture will find it easier to attack the body and will further degrade the spleen qi, resulting in it not rising. This affects the normal operation of the spleen. If you wish to make the spleen dry and clear, you must remember that it dislikes moisture. In clinic, we should understand that if the spleen develops dampness, the spleen will become ill. And normally, in order to strengthen the spleen, we should focus on treating dampness and not treating the spleen as our approach. We should focus on these two essential characteristics and can see what they are. 1. The spleen qi, if deficient, will not rise, which will cause prolapse. We should strengthen the spleen qi in this case. 2. If the spleen qi becomes damp and cannot rise, causing prolapse, in this case, we should rid the body of dampness in order to repair the condition. Part 4. Relationship of body, orifice, psychological characteristic, fluid, and time. 1. On the body, it harmonizes with the flesh. It controls the four limbs. 2. Its orifice opens in the mouth. It manifests in the lips. 3. The psychological characteristic is in thought. 4. In fluids, it is saliva. 5. It relates to the late summer. 1. On the body, it harmonizes with the flesh and controls the four limbs. The spleen harmonizes with the flesh of the body means that the transport and transformation function makes the muscles strong and improves their function. The Simple Question says, the spleen controls the muscles and flesh of the whole body. The muscles of the entire body all correspond with the transportation and transformation function of the spleen and stomach, and use the essence of grains and water and the subtle essence and fluids to nourish and moisturize the body. In this case, they can be full and healthy and support proper transportation. This is why Jiang Wu said, the spleen controls transportation and transformation of the essence of water and grains. It nurtures the muscles and therefore controls the flesh. If the function of transportation and transformation are lost, the essence of water and grain and fluids will lose harmony and become obstructed. The muscles will not obtain the essence of water and grains and subtle essence required to nourish the body and moisten it. This will result in wasting and emaciation, leading to weakness and lack of strength. If this becomes a deep problem, it will result in atrophy and the inability to use the limbs. Strengthening the spleen and stomach generates Jing and Qi and can be used to treat atrophy-related illnesses. Simple Questions discussion of atrophy says, treating atrophy requires the treatment of Yang Ming. The four limbs relate to the body as the branches of the body and are called the four ends. On the body, it harmonizes with the flesh and it controls the four limbs. The four limbs also require the transportation and transformation function of the spleen and the water and grain essence and subtle essence, as well as the Jin and Ye fluids to nourish and moisten them. It holds together the normal functions of the body. Therefore, it's said the spleen governs the four limbs. The spleen qi, when moving with power, will allow the four limbs to receive sufficient nourishment and will cause their movements to be flexible and accurate. If the spleen loses its function, the limbs will not receive sufficient nourishment and will lose their strength, and the body will begin to shrivel and become tired. This can result in atrophy and inability to use the limbs. The Simple Questions Yin and Yang brightness discussion says, the four limbs are endowed with qi from the stomach, and if they do not receive it, they will not connect. They must receive it from the spleen. If today the spleen is ill, then the stomach will not move and the fluids of the four limbs will not receive the essence of water and grains, and energy will decline by the day. The vessels will not benefit, and the sinews, bones, muscles, and flesh will all be without energy, thus making them unusable. This means that the four limbs derive their normal use from spleen qi and transformation transformation function. Its orifice opens in the mouth and manifests in the lips. Its orifice opens in the mouth refers to people's desire to eat. Taste is directly related to the function of transportation and transformation of the spleen. The mouth is the first part of the digestive system, and it relates to the bringing in and breaking down of foods. After foods have been brought in and chewed, they move to the stomach where they are further digested. The spleen's vessel connects to the root of the tongue and scatters under the tongue. The tongue is the implement of taste in the body, and the desire to eat and taste are directly proportional to the proper function of transportation and transformation of the spleen. The spleen, if the spleen qi is healthy and full, it will cause one to have ample desire to eat, and one's food preferences will be normal. The spiritual pivot says, spleen qi connects to the mouth, and the spleen harmonizes with the mouth and can know the five flavors. If the spleen loses its function, dampness and turbidity will be generated internally. This will cause a lack of desire to eat, and taste will seem different than normal. This will result in a diluted taste and a greasy taste or a sweet taste in the mouth. The spleen manifests in the lip means that the lip color and tone relates to the strength and weakness of the spleen qi. The Simple Questions 5 Organs Generation chapter says, when the spleen is in harmony, the flesh will be full, so will the lips. The spiritual pivot says, the mouth and lips are the office of the spleen. The spleen qi, if full and flourishing, will make the qi and blood sufficient, leading to the lips having a moist red appearance. If the spleen qi is weak and loses transportation abilities, the qi and blood will decline in the mouth and the lips will become white and without moisture. 3. Its psychological characteristics is in thought. The spleen manifests as thought means that the spleen's function directly affects thought. Thought means the act of pondering things. This is when the mind moves together with the emotions in order to consider things. Thought is the mental character of the spleen, but in regard to its relationship with the spirit of the heart, it's said, thought comes from the heart and resonates in the spleen. Normally, our inner thoughts are related to the activity of our emotions and do not have any serious implications on physical health. However, excess thinking can lead to pathological changes in the health of the body. In terms of affecting the physiological functions of the viscera, thinking too much can hinder the transport and transformation of the spleen and stomach, leading to stagnation of qi in the spleen and stomach. The spleen cannot be cleared and the stomach qi cannot be reduced, so there is poor appetite, abdominal distension and nausea, dizziness and other symptoms. 4. In fluids, it is saliva. Saliva is a fluid in the mouth which is largely clear and relatively scant. The spleen essence and spleen qi transform and scatter in the body, so it's said, the fluid of the spleen is saliva. Saliva has the effect of protecting the mouth by moistening it. It helps us to break down and transport food products, as well as facilitates the act of chewing. Thus, it's said, the saliva comes from the spleen and leaks to the stomach. Normally, the essence of the spleen and qi of the spleen are sufficient, and the saliva will be enough to fill the mouth and not dribble out. If the stomach is not in harmony or the spleen qi does not absorb, the saliva may become excessive and leak out. If spleen essence is not sufficient, the saliva may not be enough. If spleen qi loses its function, the saliva will decrease in quantity. In this case, the mouth will become dry. It relates to the late summer. The 5 organs follow the time of the 4 seasons, and the spleen relates to a 5th season of late summer. The late summer is very hot outside, and there's a great deal of rain. The yang from the heavens moves down, and the qi from the earth moves up. Moisture and heat cause steaming, which results in evaporation. All living things benefit from this transformation and steaming. From this transformation, and this is why it is said that all living things are born of earth. The spleen of the human body controls transportation and transformation and can transform essence, qi, blood, and jinya fluids so that they enter the whole body. This is comparable to the reaping of the harvest in late summer. Late summer's moisture transforms things, but if it's overactive, it will injure the spleen, causing it to lose its movement. Between the end of summer and fall, the spleen is weak and tends toward being injured by damp. Many dampness-related illnesses manifest at this time. Because of the heat of late summer, the damp and heat collect, and this can also cause illness. Many people find at this time their bodies feel hot and disconnected. The 4 limbs feel heavy and lethargic, and they have trouble relaxing the cores. This can result in leaking disorders related to damp heat. Typically, these are treated relative to time of year and usually follow the policy of removing damp will cause heat to naturally dissipate. Aside from this, it's also said that the spleen governs the 4 seasons. This concept comes from the simple questions Tai Yin Yang Minglun, which says the spleen is earth and governs the center, the 4 times, and 4 organs. Each arise every 18 days. The spleen does not only control one time. This means that the end of each season is a total of 18 days. These times are associated with the center due to their transitional nature, and are therefore associated with earth. The spleen controls these transitional times and does not have its own unique time according to this set of metaphysics. The life function of the body are strongly related to the spleen and stomach, and their transportation and transformation abilities, which use the essence of water and grains, subtle essence and jinya fluid to nourish the heart, lungs, liver, and kidneys, and support their function. If the function of the spleen qi is normal, the 4 limbs will be nourished. This will mean that the body will be healthy and it will not be easy to become ill. If one does not become ill, it will be relatively easy to return to normal. This is why the spleen governs the 4 times. Summary. What is the spleen of TCM? In anatomy, the spleen is in the middle jiao, below the diaphragm and on the left side of the stomach. In physiology, it controls transportation and transformation. It replenishes the blood. Its physiological characteristics are that it controls the upward movement and supports. It prefers dryness and disdains damp. In the office of the body, it connects with the flesh and controls the limbs. In the orifices, it opens in the mouth and manifests in the lips. In psychology, it manifests as thought. In fluid, it manifests as saliva. In the channels and collaterals, it's the channel of the greater yin spleen meridian of the foot. External and internal relationships. The bright yang stomach meridian of the foot is the outer aspect, while the spleen meridian is the inner aspect. Yin and yang nature. The spleen is earth in the 5 elements. It is yin in the center of yin. Connection to nature. The spleen represents late summer and the transitional periods of the 4 seasons. Summary of the nature of the spleen in Chinese medicine. 2,000 years ago, the Yellow Emperor classic of medicine, the internal classic, already described the function of the spleen and how it works. We continue today to use this information to help us in our study and clinical practice. We finished this class, so please think about the following. The spleen of TCM is in the middle jiao, below the diaphragm, on the left of the stomach. It controls transportation and transformation of food and fluids and replenishes the blood. Its special characteristic is that its energy rises and supports. It prefers dry and disdains damp. In the body, it harmonizes with the flesh and controls the 4 limbs. It opens in the mouth and manifests in the lips. Its mental aspect is thought, its fluid is saliva, its meridian is the greater yin meridian of the foot, and its exterior connection is the bright yang stomach meridian of the foot. In the 5 elements, it represents earth, and it is yin in the center of yin. Thanks for watching.